Okay, I think we're live. We should be live. There we go. Hey guys, how you going? So this is the first episode of Trail Talk Live. I'll just double check. Can you guys see me and hear me properly? Just double check the audio is all good. Know a few people in the chat already. We've got Tristan biking down under. Just let me know if it's all good to go and then we'll crack on with it. So first time doing this proper stream and all that kind of stuff, so I can share my screen and all that kind of stuff now. So we'll actually have a proper live stream. But yeah, we'll just double check the audio is all good and then we can kind of get this thing on the road. Sounds good? Yep, sweet. All right, we are on. So hey guys, welcome to the first episode of Trail Talk Live. So it's kind of going to be a bit different from our normal live streams. It's going to be a bit more structured. So I'm going to have a topic for the week and then we're going to kind of talk about that info kind of on that topic. And then we'll pause for a few Q&As and that kind of stuff like that on the topic. And then after that, we'll jump into just a general Q&A and then I can answer all your questions that you've got over the kind of past few weeks. So it's going to be fortnightly. So the structure now is going to be one of these every fortnight and then a video every fortnight. So you're going to have a video, some kind of video every week. So that's kind of the ultimate aim. And this just gives me a bit more of an easier platform to kind of get a lot more info out there without a lot of editing and all that kind of stuff like that, but still genuine information that I hope you guys will enjoy. So yeah, so we'll jump into it now. So the first thing we're going to talk about for this week is bike fit. So I know a lot of people are getting new bikes at the moment. I think there was an article in Financial Review that talked about bike sales were up 200 to 300% since this whole thing started. So it's pretty crazy. And just to show you how good, I mean, mountain biking, it's a sport you can do all the time, but in this kind of situation where you can't necessarily travel too far from home or you just want an activity to just get out away from people, it's definitely a great thing to do. So yeah, so in terms of bike fit, we'll go over just the general fit of the bike and then next week we'll cover over suspension, all that kind of stuff like that. So the first thing that I do when I get a new bike, so this won't be as applicable for people that haven't necessarily got a bike yet, but what I like to do first, so looking at my bike here, I put my pedals at 3 o'clock, mess up your cassette. So I put them at 3 o'clock and then I measure from here, so kind of where the spindle is there at the end, to my grip. And that's what's called the spread measurement. So it's kind of a better way to measure reach because this way it's going to be a bit more universal between bikes. And that just means where my feet are to where my hands are, it's going to feel exactly the same as when I jump onto my new bike. So that's definitely a really good place to start. And then the other measurement I do is measure my bar height. So what I like to do, put the bike on the ground and then measure one side and then measure the other side. So obviously it's even and you can make sure the measurements are pretty accurate. So that gets your bar height. So 2 of those measurements there will be able to get you onto your new bike with a relatively similar setup. That's kind of what I like to feel from bike to bike. So I don't change necessarily too much geometry. It might be 5 or 10 millimeters reach wise and that kind of stuff like that. But this just goes a good way to kind of compare it from bike to bike and it puts you in a good ballpark to feel instantly comfortable on the bike. So that's the first 2 things I do. If you haven't got a bike, then say if you're going from like a cross country hardtail to a trail bike, it's going to be a little bit less applicable because the bikes are a little bit different, but you can get pretty close. But yeah, this is kind of just going to give you that general feel of what you're going to feel from bike to bike. So it's going to be about an hour. So that's kind of, so about 45 minutes or 30 minutes on the topic and then kind of just go over it. So yeah, so that's the 2 first things that I like to do when I'm getting my new bike. So if you can do that, then all you need to do is really put your pedals on, and then you can change your stem length, change your spaces under the things, just kind of get under your stem to get a bit right. But those are the 2 things that you can kind of do just off the bat if you've already got a bike to get a pretty similar measurement on your new bike. So when you get if you haven't got a bike before, the next thing that I like to do is get my saddle height. So saddle height's a pretty important one on your new bike. So saddle height's going to be really important. Obviously, it's going to be important just to be generally comfortable. If your saddle's too high, your hips are going to start to rock. And then if your saddle's too low, then you're not going to really getting close to full extension. You're not going to be really getting a really efficient pedaling platform. It can also cause some knee issues and stuff like that down the track if your saddle's too low. So we want to really get that optimal height. There's a few ways that you can really measure this, but the tried and true way that most people just do, put your dropper post up all the way if you've got a dropper post, then get kind of a rough idea of where you think your saddle's going to be. A lot of people just do kind of where their hip bone is. And then put your pedal down the bottom of the pedal stroke, and then put your heel on where the spindle is. So put your heel right on there, and at the bottom of your pedal stroke with your foot parallel to the ground. So at this position here, you're going to have your foot parallel to the ground with the pedal flat. And yeah, if your leg's straight there with your heel on it and your foot's flat, when you move your foot to where the ball of your foot, where it's going to sit on the pedal or just behind the ball of foot, you'll just have a slight bend in your knee, and that's kind of what you really want. So you're not stretching out all the way, but you just got an ever so slight bend in your knee, and that's pretty much close to optimal pedaling position for most people. There's a lot of other ways that you can measure it. So the other ways that you can do, you can get kind of an angle thing. So it's kind of like a rule that kind of bends, and you can kind of get your angle and then get an optimal angle. But for mountain bikers where you're in and out of the saddle a lot, if you're not kind of like a cross-country racer, this is a pretty close method to kind of get what you're looking for. Then we'll move on to saddle tilt. So the tilt of the saddle. So for most kind of trail and enduro riders, you're going to want it flat to slightly tilted down at the front. This is going to put you again in the most optimal pedaling platform. And if you've got it angled back like a lot of downhill and dirt jump guys, it's just going to dig into your thighs all day. Your glutes and all that kind of stuff. And it's just not a good platform. Also, having it tilted slightly down at the front, it's just going to push your weight a little bit forward and just going to be a bit more optimal in climbing. You can weight the front end a little bit better. So yeah, slightly tilted down at the front is what I like to go with. So ever so slightly tilted down at the front. The pedals, they are just quickly. So I'll answer a few questions as I'm going through this, and then we'll kind of do a general Q&A as I kind of pause for a minute. They're the MTB PP20s, I believe they're called. So nice composite pedal, really affordable and really good grip, and I'm enjoying them. So yeah, out of the composite pedals I've tried, they're probably one of the better ones. So yeah, that's your tilt of your saddle. The next thing is on the rails of your saddle, and this is really going to be dependent on the geometry of the bike and also your riding style as well. So it's going to come down to a lot of personal preference. In road biking, there's actually a proper method to getting this right, because they're a lot more in the saddle and putting a lot more power through the pedals just sitting in the saddle. So it's going to be a bit different. Mountain bikers were up and down a lot, and the terrain's a lot more mixed, so it's going to be a bit different. But with road bikers, what they'll do is get their pedal again at 3 o'clock, so where your knee's bent at the most. And what they'll do is they'll get a piece of string with a little weight down the bottom, and they'll measure from the back of your patella, your kneecap, so right at the back of the kneecap, and then that weight string will drop down right to where the spindle is in the pedal. And it's just from that you can kind of get the maximum forward knee travel. So you don't want to have too far forward knee travel, because then you can get knee issues down the track as well. So that's the way that they like to measure it. So yeah, just kind of getting that knee position optimal. For mountain bikers, it's a bit different. So you're seeing with steep seat angles and all that kind of stuff like that, that kind of messes up that kind of theory a bit. So on most mountain bikes with kind of 73 to 75 degree seat angles, I like to push my saddle pretty much close to all the way forward. That's just going to put my weight over the pedals a little bit more, and on those steeper climbs, just going to give more optimal pedaling position just to put the power down. On my bike, it's around about a 76 degree, 75 and a half to 76, and I have it slightly pushed forward from the middle. So again, that's going to really depend on terrain. If you've got a lot more steeper terrain, then you're going to want to push that forward a bit more to just kind of get in a more optimal pedaling position. So it's going to be really dependent on who you are. And then also, if you do a lot more flat and undulating terrain, you might just prefer a more central position, because say with road bikers, they've kind of nailed it down to 73 and a half degree seat angles, the best for them. So yeah, it's going to be really dependent on your terrain. But dogs going crazy. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of where that is. So yeah, if you've got steeper terrain, you want to push it more forward, but most bikes these days with 75, 76 degree seat angles and anything steeper, you're pretty safe to have it close to the middle. So yeah, that's kind of my bet to go with. So that's kind of getting your saddle height and all that kind of stuff like that set up. So the next one that we're going to get into is getting your stem length and bar height, stem length, brake angle, and all that kind of stuff like that. So we'll start with bar height. So as I said, with bar height, it's easiest if you... Yeah, I'm reading the chat. It's just the this is kind of going to be a bit different. So it's going to be kind of more of a lecture on the topic, and then I'll come around to answering the questions in around 10-15 minutes. So you can just sit down and listen as opposed to stopping and hearing questions all the time. So yeah, so we're going to bar height. So that's going to be, again, if you've got your old bike, it's easy if you just measure both sides. That's kind of going to be the best way to get it, and then you can put your spaces up and down. But if you've got a new bike, then it's going to be a bit different. So in general, the higher your bars are, you're going to put you in a more optimal position for descending. So it's going to be a lot easier to get your weight back. The lower your bars are, it's a lot easier to weight the front end. And then it's also going to help you with cornering. You can get your body over it and really get into the corners. And then it's also going to help with climbing. You're going to have your weight over the front, so it's going to give you a bit more traction. So that's just general ideas behind it. So Jared Graves has gone into a bit. Jared Graves, Australian racer, used to race Specialized. Now he's with Yeti now. I think he's just an ambassador. He might be doing some races, but he has a thing called Pro Tip Tuesdays on his Instagram. So he has a lot of tips between like tires, this kind of stuff, and just general tips as a racer that he kind of hands out just for free. So it's awesome to see. So he tends to prefer a bit of a kind of lower to moderate setup. And that's kind of what I prefer as well. I find most of the time it's easy to get your weight back. If you've got a relatively modern bike and then your stem's relatively on the shorter side, it's pretty easy to get your weight back regardless of bar height. But when you're going around corners, especially flat corners, and to be fair, most trails, it's not all steep. There's steep sections and then it's mostly flat and then steep. So it's kind of intermittent sections. So you're going to have a lot more of a better time if you've got a slightly lower front end where you can really weight the corners a bit better. And with a lot more of these modern bikes, they're a lot longer. So you have to use a lot more body language to weight the front end. You're going to have to get your weight over a bit more. So having that slightly lower front end makes that a bit easier. So I tend to prefer a low to moderate front kind of bar height setup. But again, it's going to be what works best for you. And there's other factors that you're going to have to take into consideration. If you've got a bad back or something like that, then you'd probably prefer a slightly higher bar setup that's just going to be a bit more comfortable for you. So this also ties into stem length as well. So again, it's going to be very dependent on the reach of the bike. Actually, we'll pause for a minute and we'll answer some questions and then we'll kind of go into that. But okay, so I'll go through the chat. When are the new 2021 Siskiyou N? So the 2020 Siskiyou N bikes, the N9 pre-orders have just come out for that, and I think they arrive end of May. So the N9, it's kind of in a blue color, got XT. It's on the Bicycles Online and Bikes Online websites now, and you can pre-order them. If you've got kind of like a cheaper so the question is, if I have a cheap hardtail, so kind of around about 300 Australian dollars, should I spend to upgrade that or save up for kind of a dual suspension bike down the road? I'd probably save up for probably the dual suspension bike, because that kind of bike, it's going to hit its limit relatively quickly, even if you upgrade the parts. So you're better off saving up and getting a better value dual suspension bike with that kind of money that you've saved up, as opposed to spending it now. Okay, so Simo asks, I had changed my SRAM 12-speed chain after 700 kilometers from NX to X01 hollow pin, but have some issues with the middle gears and the cassette. I'd probably say if it's slipping, then probably say it's your cassette that's worn and you probably need to change that. If it's in the middle of the cassette, sometimes what can happen, if it's fine on either end, but the middle is screwed up, sometimes it can be a derailleur hanger's bent. So that could be an option there to kind of just have a look at that and kind of rule that out. But yeah, it's usually you'll get probably 2 chains to a cassette depending on how worn it was when you changed it. But yeah, I'd check just the derailleur hanger straight if it's the middle gears and it's just not shifting properly. But yeah, if it's slipping, then I'd probably say it's the cassette's worn. If the Alpine, how much? So I got my Alpine Trail, like full disclosure here, like I got it for a slight discount. So yeah, I can't really say how much I got it for, but it's not that much cheaper than what the normal price is. But yeah, if it's up for around 2,500, like normal price that it usually sells at is 2,700, 2,799. So it's a pretty good deal at 2,500 at the moment. And then last question before we get back into it. Should I bleed the brakes on a new bike? I've never ordered a bike before and I'm not sure what to do. I ordered a Canyon. I mean, it's going to come down you shouldn't have to bleed them if they're brand new. Like you'll instantly know if you feel the lever and it's going down all the way, then yeah, you're going to have to bleed it. So yeah, only bleed it if it needs to be done. But yeah, it should hopefully be good from factory. That shouldn't be an issue. So jumping back into it, we're going on to stem length. So yeah, it's going to really depend on the reach of the bike. So there's also no personal preference here, but if you've got a very long reach bike, it's going to be a shorter stem's probably going to be a better option. So like 35, 30 mil, say if it's something like a pole or something like that where it's ridiculously long. But then you kind of run into an issue where with these super long bikes, you've got a really long reach on the bike, and then that kind of makes it a bit harder to weight the front end. And then you've got a short stem, and because it's not a longer stem, it's not over kind of where the wheel is, it's even harder to weight the front end. So that's kind of why I don't necessarily like super long reach bikes. Like for me, I'm a size large, 185 centimeters, anything from kind of 465 to 480. 480 is pushing it for me. That's what I tend to prefer, and then run a 45, preferably a 50 mil stem. Because I find with a 35 for 40 mil stem, anything shorter than that, it is generally a bit hard to weight the front end, and that's kind of the issue there. I just don't want to use too much body language. That's kind of what it comes down to. So yeah, stem length for me is around about 50, 45 is perfect. But yeah, as I said, it's going to depend on what bike, and then also what kind of terrain you ride. So if you've got more open straights and that kind of stuff like that, then the shorter stem won't be as much of an issue. But if you've got a lot more tight, twisty corners, then you want to be able to weight the front end a bit more. So those are kind of getting your bars in the right height, roll and stuff like that. Again, personal preference, but you roll it back a bit more, it's going to be a bit more over the back. Again, you can fine tune that kind of stuff like that. But bar roll, I tend to find just a pretty normal position works well in most applications. Then we move on to brake angle and then also the throw of the lever as well, so the reach of the lever. So I did some testing of this at Threadbow back to back. I kind of did a few tests in terms of where my levers were and then also the reach, and I kind of figured out what works best for me, because in Sydney we don't necessarily have the longest descents, so you're not going to get arm pump and that kind of stuff like that. So I wanted to kind of see what worked on longer descents and that kind of stuff like that. So I started with a pretty normal setup, so kind of pretty normal angle, so kind of about halfway with lever, just where this kind of part, the first joint in your finger is, just kind of there. And I found that arm pump pretty close to straight away. That was not working for me at all. And it came down to when you've got it kind of relatively flat, where you're over the bar, you've got kind of like, imagine this, you've got kind of like a slight bend that way, which also puts in, that's starting to flex your forearm there, which is going to get tight over time. And then when you're reaching more, there's less mechanical advantage for the finger and also the forearm to pull. So it's going to fatigue a lot quicker. So got like a claw going. So what I found worked best for me in terms of the reach And you'll see this when they do something like EWS Whistler. All the racers will have their levers as close as they can. So when you've got the lever pulled all the way down, it's as close as it can get to the grip without touching it. So you can get max power without it touching the grip. And that way, you've got the most mechanical advantage on your finger kind of pulling it in without having to fatigue your forearm muscles as much. So that's kind of throw that works best for me. So kind of as close to the bar as I can get without it touching. In terms of angle, there's been a few. So Johan Borelli and Dan Wolf from the Polygon UR team, he's spoken a bit about this. They run their levers pretty flat. And it was interesting to hear there was a video on Pink Bike, and then they also had a video on their UR team Instagram. This was from Dan talking about why he has his levers pretty flat. And the main reason for this, he says you can kind of, when you've got your levers more flat, it forces you to tuck your elbows in. So kind of you're in more of a anatomical position for pushing and that kind of stuff like that. So if you imagine like a military push-up, you have your elbows as close to you as possible. And you look at people doing bench press properly, they've got their elbows close to them and then just driving straight like that. So it's in a more anatomical position as opposed to this, which kind of isn't good for your shoulders and that kind of stuff. Like you can feel it instantly that this is a more powerful position. But also that it moves the weight off your hands and then onto your legs. So he was talking about how, he just felt like you're using your legs to hold you up, which is obviously a bit stronger than your arms. So your upper body's going to fatigue a lot less. So that's kind of, I tried that and that definitely really worked for me. So it was interesting to hear an actual kind of reason for why they had them flat, because it was just a joke before. He said he had one ball or something like, Johan Borelli said he had one ball or something like that, but it was good to kind of have interesting insight as to the reason for it. Also, I noticed when you've got them tilted up a bit more, it puts a bit more weight kind of on your palm, kind of like where the meaty part of your palm, like the ball kind of area there, and that kind of holds the weight kind of in there, as opposed to if it's more over like that, it's more tendency to slip, as opposed to this pushing in there, it's kind of using your joint to kind of hold you up there, as opposed to using the muscles. So it was something interesting to notice as well. So pretty interesting stuff. So that's kind of just your general setup of your bike. So getting all that kind of stuff like that set up properly. So you're going to have your bar height set up properly, your saddle height, your brake levers and all that kind of stuff like that. When you get your dropper posts and shifters and all that kind of stuff like that, it's going to be what works best for you. Just find whatever is the most ergonomic. Don't want to be reaching too far for anything or anything like that. And most stuff comes with matchmaker kind of stuff these days. So a lot of the dropper posts and the shifters will integrate into the leaves and stuff like that. So you can get it kind of a bit more of a dialed setup. So that's pretty much all that stuff. That's what works for me. See what works for you. But this is just kind of like a general setup to kind of get you comfortable on the bike. And then next week, we're going to go over setting up the suspension, your front fork, your rear shock, and then also getting your tire pressures and that kind of stuff dialed. So that's that kind of stuff like that. So hopefully you guys learned some stuff from that, and we'll go into just some more general questions from you guys now. So that's kind of how these things are going to be structured. Like this was a pretty short one today. I thought it was going to go a bit longer, but we'll kind of cover a topic. I'll talk about it for a bit. Don't worry, I'll answer all your questions. I'll get to it. I promise. I always do. That's kind of just settling your bike up generally, just getting the fit dialed for you. So okay, so let's get into some questions. So back where we're up to. Okay. Going up to Tristan, he asks, I have a $700 hardtail, and if I keep hitting black diamond sail and black diamond trails and stuff, then would the Marin Rift Zone 1 do the trick? It really depends. So you're progressing from a hardtail, so everything's going to feel pretty good after that. If you are going to be racing, it depends on how old you are. If you're only, say, 12 or 14 or something like that, and you don't weigh that much, then obviously you don't necessarily need as much travel. If you don't weigh as much, you kind of, having all that extra travel, it's just going to slow you down, and it's a lot harder to get the right tune and that kind of stuff like that if you're a lighter rider. So, if you're on the younger side, you're still pretty sure and you haven't grown yet, then Rift Zone's going to do fine. But if you are starting to hit black diamond stuff all the time, huge drops, and planning on racing and stuff like that, then the Alpine Trail would probably be the Marin that I'd recommend. Okay, so Sean, this is an interesting one. So I wanted to talk about this. So effective top tube seems to make more sense than reach in terms of stretched out feeling. So effective top tube, the way that I like to look at it is that's your position on the bike when you're seated, and then the reach is your position on the bike when you're standing. So an issue with a lot of these, so reach, when I'm standing up and riding, if the bike's got a very long reach, then that's when I start to notice it might not feel like it's stretched out as in the normal sense. When you're sitting on the bike and you feel stretched out, your lower back's fatiguing and that kind of stuff like that. It's not that kind of stretched out feeling. It's when you've got a longer reach, it's a lot harder to weight. You'll notice you have to use more body language to kind of weight the front end. So it's a longer bike in that sense. You need to use more body language to get it to do what you want to do. That's in terms of reach. In effective top tube, so, okay, how do I explain this the best? Reach, seat angle, and effective top tube all kind of work together in a weird kind of way. So you can have a really long effective top tube if you've got a slack seat angle, even if the reach is relatively short. So for example, there's a bike that's got a 73 degree, a good example would be the 27.5 Rain would be a good bike to look at. It has a slack seat angle, so around about 73 and a half. Then you've got a whopping long top tube of like 650 or something like that. And then you've got a reach that's kind of around about 460, 470. I don't know it off the top of my head, but that's kind of what it used to be. I think the new ones are it's a little bit longer. But so for instance, you might have a bike that's got a 77 degree seat angle, has a 480 mil reach, so a longer reach, but then it's got a really short effective top tube. So they kind of all work together in a weird kind of way. So it's all about finding the balance. So for me, the balance is between, for a size large, I find personally what works best for me is a 630 effective top tube with a 50 mil stem. That's kind of what always has worked best for me. And that's a lot of the older bikes used to be like that. They used to have a 630 was kind of the standard for large, and the effective top tube hasn't changed too much over the years. There were some companies that kind of didn't get the idea with this steepening the seat angle. So they kind of just lengthened the reach without thinking about the seat angle, and that led to a really long effective top tube with a slightly longer reach. But the better way to do it is having a steeper seat angle, so around about a 76 degree seat angle, something like that. And then you can have a decently long reach still, so around about 475, and then you'd still have like a 630 effective top tube, and that's something like the Ibis Ripmo is an example of that. So yeah, they all kind of work together in a weird kind of way, but it is a bit confusing. They kind of, you have to look at a chart and then you can kind of see how they manipulate each other. So Rue Brennan asks, is it good for your bike to clean your bike? Is it good for your bike to clean your shock with water and soap? Is it okay to clean your bike with water or soap and water? So there are specific bike cleaning stuff. So like I've got the Crush stuff, which works really well. But honestly, I don't clean my bike necessarily as much as like a lot of people like clean their bike after every ride. I'm not a huge fan of clean. I'll only clean my bike if it gets muddy and that kind of stuff like that. So say for instance, like it's been pretty dry lately, I'll clean my drivetrain, but in terms of suspension and stuff like that, I'll just wipe it down with a rag and just kind of clean it off. And the reason for that is I was looking at a lot of stuff, the Vorsprung guys, so they kind of do a lot of suspension kind of components, like they'll do a lot of kits to kind of change it to a coil or air sleeves for shocks and stuff like that. They know stuff about suspension, and he was talking about how getting heaps of water near your seals, even not using a pressure washer, because you should never use a pressure washer on your bike, that's kind of a given, but just getting that, you're kind of reducing your life significantly of your suspension components. It's just going to put stuff into the seals that necessarily wouldn't have had stuff. Even though the seals are meant to seal it from water, just putting extra water there for no reason I don't think is good for the suspension, just speaking. So if it gets muddy, I'll wash it. If not, I'll wipe it down with like just a rag or something like that, get it clean, and I'll clean my drivetrain. If it does get muddy, it's just fine. I'll just use the Crush stuff most of the time, but any kind of dish soap with some water. Don't use too much, just enough to kind of lift the dirt off, kind of wash it down. That's kind of, and then just wipe it off after that. That's kind of what I do. So yeah, you can give it a good clean if it gets muddy, but I don't recommend doing real deep cleans all the time. I'm not too fan of that. But yeah, just be careful around your shock and stuff like that. It is pretty sensitive stuff. So yeah, just wipe it with a nice rag, get rid of, but yeah, if it does get really dirty, then loosen it up a bit with some water and soap and that kind of stuff like that, and then get it dry. Okay. Next question, we got Rue Brennan. On the next review of the Siskiyou D7 Dropper Edition, can you please tell the weight of the bike? I'm thinking, yeah, the weights, I didn't get too, I probably should have weighed it, but I didn't get too caught up in the weight. I'd kind of rely on the feel of the bike. And to me, that bike, when I rode it, it felt light. In that kind of way, like it accelerated quickly, which is kind of what you're looking for. In terms of weight, I think they're around about, from what Polygon told me, they're around 14.2 kilos. So take that as you will, but it felt like a pretty accelerated pretty quickly. But again, came from an enduro bike, so. And then Orlando asks, what's the hardest you could ride on a 130mm trail bike? I'm looking at getting something that can climb as well and take some big hits. So, yeah, it's, I mean, there's so, like, you look at someone like Skills with Phil, who absolutely sends his bike absolutely crazy, and he's got like a 130mm bike. Like, he's got the GT sensor for this year. So, you can send bikes pretty hard. Like, it just, something to take, like, a 130 bike's not going to be as durable as an enduro bike. They just aren't built to be as burly. That's just saying that you can kind of ride the same stuff, but as to how hard you can ride them, that's kind of the question there. So, personally, like, I don't really send stuff ridiculously big, and I could probably get away with the Rift Zone. Like, to be honest, like, I probably don't get the most out of this bike. So that's kind of where I am. But when you start to really start pushing it, when you notice faster riders and they're just going through the rough stuff so much faster, that's when the big travel that's when you want the big travel. You can see that it's just soaking up the big hits. But with me, when I'm kind of taking things at a time, each thing kind of after each other, I'm kind of doing things kind of one thing at a time, as opposed to thinking of linking everything up and just absolutely motoring over section. That's when you want the extra travel. So if you're just doing drops and jumps and stuff like that, that's not where you're going to, it'll be a bit more softer when you land and that kind of stuff, but it's when you're going over the chunk fast is when you notice you want the extra travel. Oh, God. But yeah, so if you guys have any other questions, like, this is question time. Let's get some questions going. We're done with the topic. But yeah, how do you guys also like the new stream setup? It's a bit nicer to be in the garage and doing this kind of stuff. Like, and if you have any questions and stuff like that, send them through. Oh, sorry, I missed some questions up here. Sorry. Peter, I rolled off a big rock at Manly Dam. I landed pretty hard, but made it. My tube got pinched and my rim is bent. Could it be prevented by increasing the PSI on my tires and lowering the shock compression? Okay, so sometimes when it comes to pinching or smashing your rim, sometimes it's just bad luck. Like, I've dented rims, and sometimes you just can't avoid it. Like, there is stuff you can run higher pressure, which is obviously going to make it less chance of you kind of pinching your tube and kind of smashing your rim, because there's more pressure in there to kind of resist against the impact. But then you run the risk of running it too hard, and there's less grip. So with tubes, it's a very fine line. So with tubes, the minimum I'll probably run is kind of around about 30 PSI. Then once I go tubeless, then I got them down to like 26, 27. So, but in terms of preventing it otherwise, like, tubeless is the best way to go. And then if you are doing it even with tubeless, come on, dog's crying all the time. If you got tubeless, then that's kind of going to be your best bet. And then you can also run tire inserts as well, which is, what's up? Don't know what she's crying about. But yeah, so when you you run inserts, that's going to be your best bet. So yeah, with bending it back, just get some pliers and bend it back. That's going to be your best bet. So yeah. Otherwise, run higher pressures. That's kind of your best thing. And then the suspension, like, work to some extent, but it's not going to be really your saver. It's kind of going to come down to getting your pressures right in your tires and that kind of stuff like that. Harrison asks, "Hey Phil, hope all's going well. Hope all's going well with you as well, Harry." He bought a Norco Range 29er, but not sure at 188 centimeters. Would you think large or extra large? So I'd probably go an extra large at 188 centimeters, because the Norco Range is still the older generation frame. The reach is slightly shorter. Again, it's one of those things, it's like a seat angle, but it's got a pretty long effective chop tube, and that kind of makes up for the reach there. But you, like, yeah, I think the extra large would be the way to go. Then you can also slide the saddle all the way forward. It's going to be your best bet. That's kind of what I would go with. I think the large, I rode a large sight for a bit, and the geometry reach wise and all that kind of stuff like that's pretty similar, and I felt like it was on the shorter size. But yeah, I'd probably say extra large would be the go. But again, in Sydney, don't necessarily need the longest bike, so it's going to come down to personal preference. But yeah, I would say I think Connor had an extra large when he had his, and he's around 188 centimeters, 187. GTI Drive asks, quite a few bikes have jumped in price, especially the Siskiyou D series. Do you think this is coronavirus, or just as everyone wants it after your reviews? Again, I think it's I don't have to talk to them. But yeah, I mean, they sold out quick. Like, that's basic supply and demand there. Like, they're in high demand. That's all it is. But yeah, like I think that's probably the main thing. Like, they've been super popular, and yeah, so that would be my main reasoning behind that. That's usually why things tend to go up in price. But yeah, it's also probably production's a bit harder as well. So that's kind of, everyone's got to have to work a bit harder to kind of get the bikes, because everything's selling out so quickly. So there's also that as well. So there's a lot to take into consideration with that kind of stuff like that. But even though they've gone up slightly more in price, like, it's still probably $500 cheaper than kind of like the next kind of something equivalent anyway. So you're still getting a really, really good deal on those bikes. Thoughts on ride wrap in VisiFrame? Yeah. I think, like, it's always good to protect your bike. That's I think that's definitely a given for me. I've never really got it, but that's kind of because, like, honestly, it's me, like, I turn over bikes pretty quickly, so just to wrap them all the time, it's kind of not necessarily worth it for me. But for someone that's spending a lot of money on a bike that doesn't necessarily get industry benefits like me, I would probably 100% be wrapping all my bikes. That way it just helps resale in the future, and also protecting it as well. Like, if you've got a carbon frame, I think you should, that's me, I've never owned a carbon bike, so with alloy it's less of an issue, but with carbon bikes 100% I'd wrap it every time. Protects against impacts and all that kind of stuff like that, and protects the paint and all that kind of stuff too. Also, Harry, what size did you get? That's kind of the question as well that I'd ask. So Ganusta Mopey asks, I'm new to this sport. Before I buy my first bike, will this sport force me to remortgage my house? Most likely. But no, honestly, it really depends. Like, value is a relative term to everyone. Like, some people would not even think about spending $500 to $1,000 on a bike, but for me, someone that's worked in the industry a while, like, I think something that's $2,000 is a bargain, and that kind of stuff like that. So it's all relative in terms of people. Like, that's why I tend to focus more on the value end, because I don't feel like spending over $3,000 or $4,000 is absolutely necessary for most of us that just generally ride all the time. So yeah, like, to be honest, like this bike here, the Alpine Trail, I think as I said, they're $2.5 Australian dollars at the moment, and it's competes with $4,000, $5,000 bikes that I've built up before. Like, yeah, the rear shock's not as sophisticated, but if I put a better shock in there, 100% would be up there with the other stuff. And then the brakes slightly not as powerful, but other than that, like, there's not much in it really. Like, the brakes stop pretty well once you change the pads. The drivetrain works well. The Extrusion-matic drop post is my favorite drop post pretty much. The cockpit does the job. It's the same width that I normally use. The stem length as well. I mean, there's not really much to change, like, other than personal preference stuff. Like, you don't really need to spend much more. So I feel like that $2,500 to $3,500 is where you're finding your most value on bikes these days. With my Peter, I have the same Alpine Trail 7. I'm mostly riding rocky downhill tracks. Would you recommend increasing the front fork travel? Personally, I wouldn't. I just find the bike's balanced really well, and I feel like upping the travel a bit more at the front, unless you were racing pretty hard, I probably wouldn't see the need. It's pretty hard to bottom out those forks. Like, if you've got one spacer in there, because they come two from factory and two's way too many, but if you put one in there, like, and a decent amount of pressure, it's pretty hard to bottom it out, so I don't necessarily feel the need. And then the head angle's pretty slack as it is, so I wouldn't see the need to probably slack it out even more. But yeah, I think at the moment the bike's balanced really well. Unless you're doing some huge bike park stuff all the time, then yeah, I probably wouldn't see the need to change it. Moyloy987 asks thoughts on Kona bikes, the 134. I really like the 134. I think it's the geometry on it's pretty dialed. The only issue for Kona at the moment is they're a single pivot like the Marins, and the Marin Rift Zone, and then also the Marin Alpine Trail. They're pretty similar bikes in terms of performance, and then also geometry as well, and they're cheaper for the money. So it just depends, like, what you really value. Like, that's, for me, I couldn't necessarily see myself justifying it, but the 134 is a really, really nice bike. Yeah, so that's kind of where I am. But Nathan Brooks, just bought the Giant Fathom 2 29er as my first bike. I live near Glenrock. I love Glenrock. It's absolutely awesome. Whenever I go up to Kays Beach, go on holiday sometimes up there, I like to get a sneaker ride in at Glenrock. So I thought I'd give it a go. Has a new Crest shock standard by Giant. Seems nice. No, I haven't tried the new Giant shocks, the new Giant fork. They brought out their own fork, and I haven't tried it yet. So unfortunately, I can't really comment on that. But it was interesting to see Giant start making their own forks. It would be a good way to cut some costs for them and offer a good value product for you guys. So it'd be interesting to see how they actually perform, because I don't think they've seen many reviews out. If you buy a bike online, is it harder to get it serviced at your local shop? Working at a bike shop before, we never gave preferential treatment to bikes that were bought from us versus something that was bought online. Yes, there are going to be some bicycle shops that will be not as respectful to customers that buy bikes online, but they would probably not bike shops that I would shop at, because they don't really have your best interest at heart. So good bike shops need to learn these days, because it's clear that online you're getting better value for money. Everything's going online these days. You're going to get a better value for money on a bike online in most cases these days. There's very rare cases that you'll get really good value for bikes in store. Something like Merida, Marin in the US, and that kind of stuff like that you can buy in store, and they're still good value, but you're always going to find better spec for money on bikes that are bought online. That's just the way it is these days. So bicycle shops need to adapt to this, and the best way to do that is have a good service department. And also, servicing has a lot less overhead costs than it is to hold stock of these expensive bikes that you might not even sell. So that's kind of where I am. Like, if you go to the most successful bike shops, you'll always notice they'll have a really good workshop and really good mechanics as well. That's kind of the heart of a bike shop. The heart of a bike shop is the mechanics. That's kind of what it is. That's just the way it should be as well. So it always should have been like that, because that's where you're going to get your repeat customers all the time. And then if you do good stuff with servicing the bikes, they'll probably be more likely to buy a bike with you down the line. So yeah, I think most bike shops these days have understood this, and they'll happily service any bike board online and that kind of stuff like that. And just be friendly and just have a chat with them. And then most of the time, if you build up a relationship that way, then they'll be more inclined to do a better job. But yeah, it's not right if they aren't treating your bike the way that any other bikes are. So yeah, I think, there are some bike shops out there that are pretty negative on online bikes. That's the way it is. But you will find good bike shops that will service anything. Head over bars. Hello from Michigan. Hey, how you going? Awesome. Listening on your morning ride. That's great to hear. Question for you guys, just so we get some stuff going in the chat. What are you doing to keep yourself busy in this time? Like, other than riding, what kind of hobbies have you jumped in to kind of keep yourself busy? It'd be interesting to hear what some people are doing. I've been doing a bit more sim racing and that kind of stuff like that in the cars and whatnot. Getting back into that, because I used to do some time attacks and super sprints, which is kind of, you just go out and you do kind of like, I guess, your fastest lap, and you kind of get compared against everyone else. So if you understand like the time attack thing, but it was good to kind of get back in doing some driving and stuff like that. It's fun. Okay. Essential as well. I'm essential too. I feel special saying that. So GT Drives ask, I'm 176 centimeters and bought a Merida 120. Size chart said a medium, but I felt it was too small. The size large. In other brands, do you reckon many brands recommend bikes on the small side? It really depends on the brand. Merida, apart from the Merida 160, which is a slightly longer bike, it's slightly longer. It's a more modern bike, but it's pretty standard these days. The 120 and the 140 are slightly on the shorter side. So, say on the size large, the reach is a 455. So that's kind of on the shorter side of a large, so it's smaller large. So yeah, I think at 176 centimeters, if the seat tube's not too high with the drop post and that kind of stuff like that, then yeah, I jump on the large every day of the week on the 120. Yeah, I'm kind of in between a large and an extra large on that, but the seat tube's really long on them, so it was kind of hard figuring out what worked best for me. I just like the large because coming from an enduro bike, when I go onto a trail bike, I just wanted something a bit more fun to flick around, so I didn't mind the slightly shorter reach. Ryan Burrows asks, what are your thoughts on the Merida 160 700 for 3,000 Australian dollars? I really like the 160s. Like, if again, it's going to come down to personal preference. I'm a 29er fanboy, but that's personal preference. But when I owned the 160 for a bit, to be honest, I only owned it for 3 months, and in that 3 months, I've been I took it to Queenstown Bike Park in New Zealand, and I absolutely love that bike. It was so balanced, super fun. The rear suspension just ate the roots like nothing else. It's a really, really good rear suspension. Like, if you have somewhere that's nice and chunky, it just tracks the ground super well. It's super fun bike. It's maneuverable. Yeah, it's like everything like for a bike park bike that I was messing around on. It was absolutely awesome. The spec's great for money. The spec is pretty awesome too. So yeah, they're a great value for money bike. Yeah, it would be good if they did kind of like a 150 mil 29. That would be awesome to see too. Bundy SS Rider said he's been doing some gym workouts on Zoom, bike riding and still working. Yeah, I've been I've kind of had, because I don't need to commute to work most days. Can work from home. I've had so much extra time to do some other things. So I've started training again. I didn't necessarily train. I think 4 years ago I ruptured one of my discs in my lower back, and that kind of messed everything up because I was doing stuff pretty seriously, going gymnastics, Olympic weightlifting and stuff like that, and just kind of took it a bit too far and not necessarily recovering much, and kind of suffered from that and kind of had issues with that, and it's kind of led to a few imbalances and a few issues with some other things, and I never really started picking up the weights because every time I'd start I'd kind of get a niggly thing, but I decided to start again and just do everything right, and for the past kind of 6 weeks just everything's kind of falling into place nicely, and it's been really good to get back on a program and get back back into things in the gym and that kind of stuff like that, because I really did like it. And straight away I noticed it in my riding when I went for a ride, because I haven't necessarily been riding every week, but I went for a ride last week, and the amount of power I was able to put through the pedals was so much more than what I used to. So yeah, getting the muscle memory is coming back pretty quickly, getting those newbie gains again. So it's good. Nathan Brooks, rookie question here. With what and how often do I recommend lubricating the chain? So yeah, just general chain lube. You can get it from any bike shop. I don't necessarily get caught up too much on brands and stuff like that, but Squirt is the best that I've used, the best brand. Yeah, I think it's probably the best one on the market. So funny name, but it's the best lube that you can get. And then, yeah, it also depends on where you live. If you live in a place that's very wet all the time, say you live in the UK where it's raining all the time, then a wet lube's going to be the way to go. If you live somewhere like Sydney where it's dry a lot and it's really sandy, then using a dry lube's going to be the best way to go. Might not last as long, but it doesn't attract as much grit, so you're not going to get all the sand that's in your chain, all that kind of stuff like that. And I generally clean my chain. I mean, I'm pretty lazy, but not necessarily lazy, but I don't necessarily do as much as other people. But I'll probably I'll do 2 rides, wipe it off, lubricate it once more, and then after that ride, then I'll clean it. So usually it's about 4 rides. I'll clean the chain every 4 rides and then lubricate it once in between, because I don't want to keep stacking it on all the time, and then you're just putting lube in without cleaning, and then you're attracting more grit on top of that, and then it's just making everything a mess. So yeah, lubricate usually every kind of 30 to 40 Ks. That's kind of, I usually ride for anywhere between 10 to 15 Ks each time. Kayla, do I mainly ride up in Garryall National Park? When I'm working over that way, then yeah, that's usually where I ride mostly. Otherwise, I'm riding in my local trails near Castle Hill, Borkham Hills kind of area. That's kind of where I ride mostly. But yeah, if we got any other questions, send them through, guys. We'll have around about 8 minutes left. 9 minutes. That's kind of, we'll try and keep them to an hour. That's kind of the aim. But how have you guys enjoyed the live stream? We've got a few more people this time. Usually we kind of get kind of 10 to 15, but we've got 35 this time, so it's good to see more people commit a bit more, and hopefully, yeah, kind of few more of you tune in and kind of have a chat and answer all your questions, because yeah, I mean, that's why I'm here. I'm here to give information. Like, yeah, I can do the nice fancy videos, but at the end of the day, you guys want the information. That's the main thing. I provide a service to give you information to help educate your purchases and enjoy mountain biking to the best of, just getting the right stuff, and then also setting up the bike in the right way, and just enjoying mountain biking for what it is. That's what I'm here for, and I'm here to answer your questions. So, but yeah, it'll be good to do the suspension setup next week. That'll probably take up a bit more of the hour next week. There's a lot more that we can kind of go into with the suspension, because there's a lot more intricacies in terms of suspension and getting that dialed really well. In terms of suspension, kind of a bit of homework before the next video, if you may. Bike Radar, Seb Stott, who's kind of the really good reviewer. He did the thing on all the suspension setup, and then he's also done the fork comparisons and stuff like that. He's probably one of my favorite reviewers out there. He did a really good setup guide on how to set up your suspension, and that's going to be probably the best way to kind of get your suspension dialed quickly. If you're going a bike in the next week and you need a quick resource, that's probably the best resource to kind of get some quick info that you need. It can be, there's a lot that can kind of, Kathleen said a lot of it, as a newbie, it kind of a lot of it goes over my head, but you should learn it fast. There is a lot of technical terms, and a lot of kind of, it does get pretty technical. It is a bit confusing, but as long as you get the bike that's the right size for you and it suits the terrain that you're riding, there's not much that can really go wrong. And then getting all the suspension set up and all that kind of stuff like that, and I'll hopefully help you get it all set up. Peter, where near Sydney is a DH with a shuttle in the weekend? Yeah, Ourimbah is probably the closest one. There's also Green Valleys. You have to pay, I think, to get in the park and also the shuttle service and stuff like that. But the closest on the north side of Sydney is definitely Ourimbah. I did in my last video, so the best trails that I've ridden, Ourimbah is the first video on that video, and that'll give you a good guide. And I've done 2 or 3 other videos there, and you can kind of get an idea of what that's like. And it's Central Coast Mountain Bike Tours do that. Obviously, there's no shuttle service running at the moment with everything that's going on, but once that gets started again, those are the guys to hit up. Also, you can shuttle it yourself if you have some mates, and you can do that. But yeah, that's the best place that I recommend. Especially, it's on the easier side of a downhill track as well. So, James says, what are your thoughts on DVO compared to Fox and RockShox? Like there's a lot of adjustability and stuff like that. Like you could probably get it to feel pretty good. I don't necessarily tinker too much with my suspension once I got it set up. But I've heard people say a lot of good things in terms of, like, I've had a few friends that have used it and they've kind of jumped back to Fox, and RockShox. So I've heard mixed reviews. Like it's good stuff, but I've definitely heard some mixed stuff. And to be honest, like you can't, just for the fact that, yeah, the Fox and RockShox stuff, like everyone goes back to it and it works really well, and just it's easy to get parts and everyone knows how to service it. That's kind of I tend to stick to Fox and RockShox. Like my personal preference is RockShox, but that's kind of, again, it's personal preference. Like I just prefer the feel of it over the over Fox. But saying that, the new Fox stuff, I might prefer the feel of that. So, Kale asks, do Maxxis Askai really beat the grip on the D8? Yes, yeah, they're definitely a little bit more grippy. They've got slightly taller side knobs, so they do dig in a little bit better that way. But that's not the biggest notice I noticed. Is the transition is a little bit, the transition from the center knobs to the edge knobs, because there's a little knob kind of in between. It's just a bit easier. There's less chance of it letting go. There's less of that transition kind of feeling. So yeah, that's kind of my personal preference. I prefer the Askai, but it does roll a bit slower, so that's something to take into consideration as well. But out of all those tires, like enduro bike, I'd have Askai up the front. On my trail bike, I'd have a DHR up the front, because DHR, the center knobs spread out a bit further. So because they spread out a bit further, they're close to the edge knob, so there's less of that transition feeling, and then they're also lighter than a DHR as well. So GT Dryers asks, am I fussy about saddles, or I just use whatever comes on the bike? I will use whatever comes on the bike, but if it is uncomfortable, then I will change it. So this saddle on the Marin, it's super comfortable, so I haven't had to change it. The saddle on my Merida hardtail that I never ride, decently comfortable too. In terms of saddles that I swap to, I usually use the Fabric Scoop Radius, I believe it's called that. That's kind of my go-to saddle. But I've tried some other stuff, and Ergon stuff seems to work well too. But yeah, that's my my personal preference is probably the Fabric Scoop. If I'm swapping to something, they're relatively affordable too. Yeah. Sean B, once this is all over, I will try and have a ride day. That's kind of the ultimate goal. I just need to figure out where and all that kind of stuff like that, because I just need to determine where it is, and then also skill levels and stuff like that with all the other riders. Like I don't want to ride somewhere that's too hard. That's kind of, yeah, we just need to figure out where. And then also in terms of legality in the trails and stuff like that, that's something that I need to figure out too. But yeah, if you guys have any final questions that I can quickly get through, otherwise we'll end the stream in a few minutes. Yeah, but no, it's been really good to see you guys, and most people that have been watching the whole time. Let's quickly look at the analytics, but it's good to see a lot of you stuck for the whole time. So awesome to see. But yeah, just swing in those last questions, and I'll try and answer them as quickly as I can. Otherwise, you'll have to wait a fortnight. No, I'm kidding. Just put a comment on any of my videos, and I'll answer it. Usually, anywhere from between 1 to 3 days, I usually go through all the comments, because yeah, there's a fair few, especially the buyer's guide videos. They get crazy for comments. There's always comments on those. Sweet, James. Yeah, hopefully I could help out. Yeah, the D7 is just, I mean, they really nailed that bike. Like the value for money. Yeah, it's absolutely killer. It'd be awesome to see if they I reckon a D8 would be an awesome bike. Something that's not necessarily got the travel of the T, so something that's a bit more efficient, but something maybe comes with like a Revelation up front and a slightly lighter drivetrain with some better brakes. I think that would be a sick bike too. Yeah, I'll have to see if we can make that happen. But yeah, hopefully doesn't seem there's going to be any more questions coming in, but yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. So next fortnight, we are going to be covering setting up the suspension and also tire pressures and that kind of stuff like that. So I'll finish getting your bike all set up, and then we'll kind of go into some other topics after that. M chiming in at the end. Hey Em, how you going? My lovely girlfriend. She's always been so supportive. She's working every week, has to travel 4 hours down the south coast to work every week, and then comes back. So she's working hard, and always good to see her tuning in. Oh, good to see you bought the bike to Savo. Okay, awesome guys. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and as always guys, thanks for watching.